Thank you, Maury. That's very generous. Not particularly brief, but certainly generous. I am truly delighted to be here with so many friends who I have friendships I've developed over the years. Helena Brown, of course, Philip Verhoeft, John Stutz, Julie Shore, Nicholas Ashford, and I particularly want to single out Karina Millstone, who is my former colleague at the New Economics Institute, who's doing such wonderful work on alternative business and corporate structures. So this is a real pleasure and an honor to be here with you at what I think is a watershed conference. I'm going to direct my remarks tonight to the basic status of the American economy and some insights that might be helpful. I'm particularly focusing on the U.S. economy, so for those of you who are from other countries, I apologize for not having a broader view. That is an American problem, as you know. I want to start by saying that thanks to people like you, there has been progress in the field of sustainability over the last few decades. When I started at the organization Ceres, which is a coalition of environmental groups and major pension funds, 17 years ago, it was completely radical to suggest that corporations should even consider the environmental impact of their actions in any way. Environmental performance was exclusively a question of legal compliance with state and federal regulations. And the whole area of corporate measurement and disclosure seemed like a completely impossible goal. And for those of you who keep up with this part of the discussion, I'm sure you're aware that the Global Reporting Initiative just 2 weeks ago released its fourth version, the G4, in front of 1,800 people from 80 countries, including a huge delegation from China and India. And some of you also may be aware of the important work done by Accounting for Sustainability, led by the Prince of Wales, who brought together the world's largest business and accounting groups into the International Integrated Reporting Council, which is trying to take financial reporting and sustainability reporting and see how they can be blended. I'm on the working group that drafted the consultation draft, and I urge you, if you haven't had the opportunity, to go to www.theiirc.org and look at that consultation draft. We are in a critical consultation period, comment period, right now, and I can assure you that a great many people who do not view sustainability as their priority are going to comment on this, so I hope that you'll get a chance to take a look. Now, the creation of SCORAI is an example of the continued leadership and commitment of so many people, particularly in the academic community, in moving from theory to practice, from ideas to actions, and back and forth. And so we have seen new innovations across the world. I learned just recently that there are more than 420 master's degrees in sustainability in the US now. That's another example of progress. Now, I wish that I could stop right there and say, good job, everyone. We're now within range of solving the world's most pressing problems. But as you know, perhaps better than anyone, the problems are continuing to accelerate. This reminds me of the old joke about the pilot who comes onto the address system and says, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining our flight today. I have bad news and I have good news. The bad news is that unfortunately we are seriously lost. The good news, however, is that we are making excellent time." So I want to congratulate you that we are moving forward. But the question is whether we are moving in the right direction. And the best way that I think I can offer to your important conversations is to talk about broadening the field of vision and increasing our point of reference. Now, one of the things that I think is very interesting, and for those of you who are teachers, you are well aware of this, is that people in the millennial generation, young people born between 1980 and 2000, already know that many of our problems are getting worse. And this insight is changing who they are and how they see the United States and the world. And it is changing how they produce and how they consume. What's interesting and a little disturbing is that the solutions that we have worked so hard to generate under the heading of sustainability are no longer quite as persuasive to young people as they may have been for us. Recently, a major American firm, in seeking to think through a more aggressive approach to sustainability, discovered to their dismay that while many millennials had heard of sustainability, they thought the word was old-fashioned, a word that belonged to their parents' generation, something that wasn't real or serious. That's very troubling. Many of these young people understand that we have still need to continue to acknowledge, and I know that you're doing this in all of your sessions. We are at a point in world history where we will not be able for much longer to continue with business as usual. There are too many interconnected systems that are degenerating, and each one is dragging the other down. It's a spiral of decline. Now, many of you have written books on related topics. Many of you have given speeches on this. I particularly admire some of the people who are on my board. Gus Speth, who wrote America the Possible, A Manifesto for a New Economy. Gar Alperovitz, a wonderful book, What Then Must We Do? I'm sure many of you are familiar with John DeGraff's book, What's the Economy For Anyway? Francis Moore Lepay's book, EcoMind, and on and on and on. So we are having people who are sounding the alarm and offering an array of important ideas and solutions. Within the New Economics Institute, we tend to focus on 5 interrelated problems. And we're not saying these are the only problems, but these are ones that we think have a particular interconnection. One, I don't need to belabor, is the broken economic and finance models which measure, omit, or reward the wrong things. And as you know, they don't measure what makes us happy, they don't measure the value of ecosystem services, they don't price the cost of carbon and other damaging effects. The second, also, that you know, is increasing inequality of income, of wealth, and of opportunity, leaving millions in permanent unemployment and poverty, and gutting, in the United States, the middle class, and in other parts of the world as well. And then again, something that I know you've been talking about today, our obsession with growth. Jeremy Grantham, the investor at GMO, points out that if the Egyptians had invented a block of material that measured a cubic meter and that grew by 4% a year, that cube would now fill the area of the solar system. Now, I thought that was impossible until I ran that on my spreadsheet in Excel, and it turns out it's true. As Kenneth Boulding put it, anyone who believes exponential growth can go on forever in a finite world is either a madman or an economist. We also have the problem of dysfunctional democracy. And in the United States, particularly our democratic institutions, which are theoretically designed to address, discuss, and where possible resolve great questions that face the country, they have broken down. Al Gore says our system has been hacked. And Lawrence Lessig of Harvard Law School simply says we have reached a point of total corruption. Pretty serious words. And then finally, as you all know, climate change, which in a sense is the result of all the previous things, growth, inequality, the broken models, the broken democracy. I mean, it continues to amaze me, even though I've been working on this for 25 years, that we are witnessing the slow suicide of an entire planet created by a small group of people who are making money in the process. And we have been incapable of fighting back because of these interconnected structural problems. So, is this the moment to go home and pull the covers over your head? Some people feel that way, and truthfully, some people from both the right and the left are starting to think simply about survivalism, withdrawing to the local homestead with or without a large armory of weapons to wait out the apocalypse. But I have other news to report. Through the new economy work that we have been doing, we can see that there are, in fact, changes taking place. Attitudinal changes, structural changes that are beginning to take place around the United States. First, people led, in many cases by your pioneering work, are using new language, which is a first step. Second, they are looking at new structures of what we traditionally call business or capitalism or consumption, and they are coming up with the new concepts. And third, they're inventing new models, many of them local and regional, in order to see whether some alternatives may work. And I'm going to touch on each of those briefly. Now, the idea of a new economy is a broad term, and people often wonder what it really means. There's still the confusion of language. People have come up with various synonyms that underscore their varying analyses of the problems and their recommended approaches to solving it. Under the general umbrella of the new economy, people have talked about the sharing economy, the caring economy, the solidarity economy, the green economy, the sustainable economy, the clean economy, the resilient economy, the gift economy, provisioning, restorative, regenerative, and collaborative economy. And they're just getting started. But they may sound different, but they all point to a shared dissatisfaction with the way in which the current economy neglects the well-being of people and the planet. We do have a shared understanding that a healthy economy would lead to more broadly beneficial results. And more people, and I think this is a critical step, think that this is a matter not of incremental improvement, but of fundamental transformation. The increase in new economy discussions and innovations is not being driven by a single idea or theory that has suddenly emerged as preeminent and is now being adopted and implemented. It is much more an emergent phenomenon, a set of interconnected ideas that, when linked, are playing themselves out in different vocabularies and examples. Emergent concepts have the virtue that they seem to appear almost everywhere at once, coming up, as it were, through the water table. And solutions begin to emerge that are conceptually linked, but still highly responsive and adaptive to their local communities. As the sociologist Ethan Miller wrote in his 2010 piece on the solidarity economy, he said, the core idea is simple. Alternatives are everywhere, and our task is to identify them and connect them in ways that build a coherent and powerful social movement for another economy. In this way, solidarity economy is not so much a model of economic organization, but a process of economic organizing. And it is not so much a vision, but a process of visioning. And those are subtle but important differences. So, moving from new language to new structure, an analysis of new economic models begins with the recognition that there are pieces of the puzzle, each worthy of its own discussion, and sustainable production and consumption covers a great piece of what we need to be talking about. New questions about structure are emerging in the strangest places all over the world. In the discussions of the IIRC, we talked about basic questions. And what's interesting is that this is among an elite group of accountancies, accounting professions, associations, corporations, people who don't usually stop and ask such basic questions. In what manner does a firm, or should a firm, balance the obligation to shareholders with its legal and moral obligations to the providers of other forms of capital, such as workers who provide human capital, the community which provides social capital, and the environment which has provided natural capital. And this model, the capitals model, which you're all familiar with, has been embedded into this consultation draft. One reason that it's very interesting as a guide to new accountancy. A basic question, should sustainability be at the heart of a firm's purpose, or is it simply a technique for achieving greater efficiencies and thus profit? Now, we might know how we want to answer that question, but that the question is being debated now, globally, is a step. Now, many of you know there are millions of people who believe that the corporation in its traditional form is not only not the best way, but may in fact be the worst way to achieve certain social goals. The debate has widened to ask whether the corporation is actually antithetical to our objectives. And we have also witnessed a surge in innovation around the concepts of transfer and exchange, consumption and use. The seemingly unlimited capacity of the internet to organize, retain, and transfer unimaginable amounts of information in instantaneous peer-to-peer models raises basic questions of whether large centrally controlled systems of distribution are really necessary. And the barriers that have been imposed over centuries by distance, by manufacturing at scale, and by communications, and the organizational systems to run those centralized qualities, those are being redefined and reinterpreted. The disruptive intrusion of the internet has turned many systems upside down, allowing for forms of non-monetary exchange and collaborative consumption that have huge implications for the firm, for sustainability, for production, and beyond. And as you know, perhaps better than any community in America, these technological changes are responsible for significant alterations in the patterns of consumption and production, even in the last 10 or 15 years. Now, when you combine that with the growing evidence that American capitalism has intensified inequalities within communities, you can understand why people are asking important questions about how the surplus generated by capitalism is distributed. The core argument on the right for 30, 40, 50 years has been that of trickle-down economics, that if firms or individuals concentrate their wealth, they will voluntarily redistribute it in the form of higher wages, greater capital investment, or other expenditures that boost prosperity for everyone. This theory, in many parts of the world, has been disproven. Capital investment has increased productivity, but often without producing a rise in real wages. If the rising tide of corporate cash and executive pay had floated more Americans to prosperity and led to shrinking disparities, there might be more of a sense that capitalism is aligned with the deeper values in the United States of equality and opportunity. Instead, the trend has been the reverse. The deregulation of markets, the decline of antitrust limits, the consolidation with industries leading to greater oligopoly, lower wages, and a skewing of wealth, income, and opportunity. And that's why I was so interested over dinner to hear Sheldon Guerin talk about his daughter Thea's work on financial inclusion, which is an important step and something I want to learn a lot more about, to opening up access to capital resources to people who have systematically been denied that opportunity. In response to these problems of capital structure, we are now seeing innovations take place around the country. And I touched on the internet. I want to just mention again, there are these very large-scale auction houses and ways of connecting buyers and sellers that no longer require the huge intermediaries. We have aggregators like Priceline and Kayak. We have individual objects that are sold in the mammoth online flea markets. My two sons, who are in their 20s, have traveled all over the world without ever renting a hotel room through the process of couch surfing. And the 60 books on my Kindle means there is one less bookcase in my house. So I'm curious to know, and I don't know the answer to this question, how SCORAI has discovered and looked into new ideas about the role of the internet in production and consumption. We know that there are ways in which certain people who were isolated by geography, producing crafts, who had to load their stuff into a car and drive to a farmer's market, now can sell it through distribution mechanisms like Etsy. And that allows for people long confined behind expensive methods of notification, advertising, and distribution to reach an audience at scale. And the whole process of dematerialization, which I know you've been talking about for years, is coming into effect with dramatic impact. I was at the airport yesterday, and they only had one person behind the ticket counter to take bags because 10 or 15 people were checking themselves in. So they had blown away a whole range of jobs because people were doing the work they originally had paid other people to do. I used to fly all the time on airplanes that were 2/3 full, which from the standpoint of fuel and other fixed costs was deeply inefficient. Because of computers and cross-selling among carriers, I haven't been on an airplane for years that wasn't completely full. Every single seat, every middle seat, absolutely packed, making me really hope that the engineers knew what they were doing with a fully loaded airplane getting off the ground. Now let's talk about new models. It would be easy to think that the modern corporation, which has been around for so long, and especially in its current form for more than 100 years, is the only organization having a significant effect on the economy. But I refer to this as the sports page problem. Now when you open up the American sports pages, you might read about different sports, but within each sport, just like within each industry, there's a limited number of teams. We only have 30 professional basketball teams, 30 teams in Major League Baseball, 30 teams in the National Hockey League, and 32 teams in the National Football League. And if you look at the players, there are 400 in the NBA, 700 in baseball, and so forth. Just a few hundred, 1,600 football players. And the point is that we read over and over again about these same people, who's up, who's down, who's making money, who's having a good season. It's like a huge soap opera full of statistics and numerical information, but it really doesn't have a lot to do with sports and athletics for most of the 310 million people in the United States. In fact, I was astonished to learn that there are only, in a country of 310 million people, there are only 18,000 professional athletes in the whole United States. And that's compared to tens of millions of people who engage in athletic activity. Now, think about this. This business page is kind of the same way. We read about the same people over and over, who's up, who's down, who's making the most money, who's having a good year. It's a huge soap opera. There's tons of statistics and numerical information, quarterly earnings, stock prices, but here it is deadly serious because the consequences of this top-down celebrity ripple through the lives of every American. Now, it's a strange coincidence. There are 18,000 professional athletes. There are only 18,500 companies in the United States with more than 500 employees. That's a relatively small subset when you compare to the 27 million small businesses in the United States that are seeking to survive. Now, what does this mean? It means that as long as we read the business page, we are not aware of what is really happening in the American economy. We are not aware of the growing dissatisfaction, and we're not aware of the growing opportunity. And just as basketball is not really about the few players, millionaires running around the courts, but more about the people on the ground in their communities playing games with each other, so the American economy is only partly about those huge companies and very much more about what's going on elsewhere. Let me give you a few examples. There are farmers developing new agricultural hubs to grow and distribute locally produced food. The Intervale in Vermont is a network of farms operating in a floodplain that used to be filled with junked cars and is now providing food to the city of Burlington. And some of you may know these examples, and I hope you'll forgive me for raising them. The public utilities in the United States serve 14% of the US population, 50 million people, equal to the population of Spain, and provide power that's cheaper and more reliable than energy giants seeking return for their shareholders. There are 7,600 credit unions with 91 million members and $1 trillion in assets. Now that's smaller than one too-big-to-fail bank, but far more powerful in terms of impact on local communities. We know, many of you know, and have written about the way in which policy experts and government officials are developing new ways to measure prosperity. In October of last year, the governor of Maryland hosted a summit of states, including New York, Utah, Oregon, and Vermont, shifting to a genuine progress indicator to attempt to measure real gains made in their states. And I could go on and on. There are cooperatives bubbling up across the United States. I just went to the formation, the celebration of a new worker cooperative in the south side of Chicago, owned by their workers. We have students who are demanding an end to fossil fuel investment, 340 campuses that are now raising that fundamental question. The New Economics Institute sponsored 14 summits on the new economy attended by hundreds and hundreds of students, including, thank goodness, a wonderful event right here at Clark University. And 6 weeks ago, they had the first sit-in for divestment on climate change at the Rhode Island School of Design. The motto that they hung from all the buildings was, "Artists can do the math." And their story was featured on This American Life, which went out to 2 million American listeners. And labor is rethinking its role. There are so many new organizations. Working America is an organization where non-union members can enroll. I'm a member to support change and to support labor in the United States. The Freelancers Union in New York City, which refers to itself as a federation of the unaffiliated. It's a really great title, with 210,000 people providing group health care to people doing freelance jobs. And micro-enterprise that is now being supported by groups like the Association of Enterprise Opportunity. This group issued an astonishing report that if just 1 out of every 3 micro-businesses in the country added a single employee, it would eliminate unemployment in the United States. Pretty impressive statistic. And all of these questions of production and consumption, the who, the what, the where, the when, the why, and the what can we do about it are bubbling up. So let me come back to you as I start to wrap up here. As researchers, as teachers, as academicians, I know that you have challenging jobs because you have to live in multiple worlds at once. You have to explore the past through your research, whose legacy drives most of the people and structures around us. And at the same time, you have to live in the present with the knowledge of the challenges we face, and then you have to imagine the future, where we are and where we should be going. And in an important way, you are also diplomats, bringing the past, the present, and the future to the same table and teaching them how to negotiate a way forward. In some ways, I think of you as the Rosetta Stones of the world, taking the grammar and the vocabulary of one community and bringing it to the attention of another. And you are the people who have been asked, not just by your peers and students in the academy, but by your fellow citizens, by your fellow human beings, to have the long-range vision that can see what is happening, understand the lessons, and introduce the right ideas to the right people at the right time. There are literally tens of thousands of groups around the country who know that the sports page version of the economy feeds the problems we mentioned: broken models, inequality, unchecked consumerism, corrupt democracy, and climate change. They know that their lives, work, jobs, food, and well-being depend on something deeper than the distortions of Wall Street. And they work on alternatives, and they are starting to have success. And they are feeling, unfortunately, still too much that they are alone, that they are tackling a huge problem without allies. So one of the things that we're trying to do at the New Economics Institute, which is becoming the New Economy Coalition, is to shine a ray of light on all these activities that are happening across the country so that people pull back the veil of invisibility, so that all of us and the press, media, government can realize changes that are taking place. We are organizing a new economy coalition to which you are all invited, and you should write to me at bob.massey@neweconomicsinstitute.org if you want to participate. We are organizing a new economy week from October 12th to the 18th. Again, a moment when we want people to see all the things that are happening around the United States. A moment of solidarity when we can shine a spotlight on the work that you are doing. As the distinguished economist Al Paravist, author of the book I mentioned before, has commented, the new economy is building quietly in cities and states across the country in 1,001 innovative experiments with business, policy, and commitments to stable communities and a healthy environment. This vast decentralized energy towards a better future is almost entirely off the radar of the mainstream press. New Economy Week promises to be a moment as thousands unite and crystallize it into a force to be reckoned with in our national conversation and as a driver of a transformative new movement for change. Now, to finish up, if we stop and think about all the students and farmers and small business owners, educators, citizens, government officials, and even investors who are longing for a new way to live, we are on our way to a movement. And if we think of all the people who know that some things are really wrong, who believe that democracy has been hacked and needs to be restored, and who know that it is time not just to complain, but to act, we are on our way to a movement. If we think of all the people like you tirelessly mastering the details of production and consumption in order to bring us into alignment with a just and sustainable world, we are on our way to a movement. And if we think of all the people who use money, who buy food, who are raising families, who are working in jobs, who are voting for candidates, and who long for an America and a world that is truly and visibly committed to justice and sustainability, then we are on our way to a movement. You have been a part of that community of leadership which has brought us this far. And wherever we are, whatever we are doing, we now have a new chance that we can seize. The question that confronts each of us and all of us is whether at this very special moment in history we will. Thank you.